Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Christine Ball, and on behalf of the N4A community, I would like to welcome you to today's webinar. This session serves as the first installment of our summer webinar series. Today's session is titled Tackling Transfer Troubles. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. I will serve as today's host. Before we get started with our moderator and panelist introductions, I would like to note that if you have questions throughout the course of the live webinar, feel free to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. A question and answer session will be held near the conclusion of today's program. At this time, I would like to introduce today's session moderator, Mr. Joshua Young, Assistant Athletics Director for SAS at the University of Alabama, Birmingham, who will introduce our session panelists. Josh, you may take it away.
Well, thank you. So with over 16,000 Division I student athletes in the transfer portal, we wanted to get together to discuss some best practices in this new transfer culture. Therefore, I'm excited for the membership to learn from the esteemed professionals on this panel. I'm going to kick it off and start with Stephen Darville, who's the Director of Football Academics at the University of South Florida, and he's been there for 5 years. CJ Oates, who's the Assistant Director and at the University of Maryland, has been there for over 5 years, currently working women's basketball and men's soccer. Ashley Smith at TCU, who's an Athletic Academic Advisor. She's been there 3 years working with men's tennis, indoor and beach volleyball, and equestrian. We have Sean Waltz from the University of Louisiana Lafayette, who's an NCAA athletic certification officer. And he's previously had stops at the University of South Dakota and the University of New Orleans as an academic advisor. And then we have Liz Reyes, the Assistant AD of Student Athlete Development. She's at the University of Illinois, and she's previously worked in the NFL, as well as other stops in college athletics, so academics and student athlete development for the last 9 years. Then we have Emily Capehart, who's at the NCAA in an associate director role for AMA, and she's done almost everything from 4-4 transfers to being on the Division I transfer team, and she's led the Bylaw 14 team for a numerous amount of years. And with that said, I think we're going to hand it over to Emily to give us a quick presentation on some transfer legislation stuff.
Thanks, Josh, and thank you for having me. I am going to share my screen really quickly. So yeah, as Josh mentioned, just wanted to kind of do a quick overview of the rule change to the one-time transfer exception. As Josh mentioned, that's certainly going to create a different dynamic, at least in the short term, for the 5 sports that now have access to transfer one time between four-year schools and potentially be immediately eligible at that new school without needing a waiver. And so for the most part, the rule, what we call now kind of the uniform one-time transfer exception, which means really that it's one rule for all sports in Division I, is that it's still, from a legislative standpoint, a one-time exception. A point I think that was somewhat lost when the rule change happened in April was whether students who have maybe have previous four-year transfer history in their past, but they also participate in a sport that didn't have access to the one-time transfer before, so football, for example. If that student, they have previous four-year transfer history, they're not going to meet this exception. Even though, again, I think the argument was raised is that student will never had access to the one-time exception for their first 2 years of college, and now the rule change has gone into effect. However, the idea behind this one-time exception is that there is, there's academic data to support the ability for one to kind of move schools one time as an undergrad, and for the most part, if you have the academic, record in place, you can largely stay on track to graduate. The more transfers beyond that first time as an undergrad, the harder that is really for any student to kind of stay on track to graduate within 5 years. And so that's why principally the exception is still, again, a one-time exception from the residency requirement, which follows any transfer anytime. So just again, trying to clarify that point, because that was something that, again, I think was a little bit misconstrued at the time of the rule change back in April. The other part that is, again, based off of the old version of the one-time transfer exception is that a student who, in order to use the exception at a new Division I program, they have to have departed their previous school academically eligible. There is that limited carve out to percentage of degree at the previous school. That's, again, was in the old rule, and that's maintained in the new rule. But obviously to compete at the new school from a progress towards degree standpoint, that student would need to be meeting percentage of degree if they're at that benchmark in their academic career at their new school. But the leave academically eligible piece is really important. And I think, again, a part that maybe the students in the 5 sports who haven't had this exception before are starting to learn that that's a really important piece, should they, be trying to now leave to go to a new school for this coming academic year. To help support what I think the membership would like to see long-term with this rule change are well-informed transfer decisions. And so this went into the legislation, but the educational module is still in the process of being finalized, just kind of because of the delay and the voting on this proposal. This module, again, is not yet out there for the membership, but it will be. And once it is out there, it is intended to help student athletes go through just kind of that mental exercise of things that they might want to think about before they go into the transfer portal. So it'll be, again, we're envisioning no more than like a 5-minute student athlete driven module that raises some points that I'm sure all of you as academic advisors have conversations with students about, as if, when and if they come to you prior to making the decision to go into the portal, which we know there are consequences once a student chooses to do that. So where are they in their academic career? Are they 1 year in? Are they just, finishing their freshman year and have a solid academic record? We know the data shows that transferring after your freshman year is a lot easier than somebody who's maybe 3 years into their undergrad degree. We know that a GPA that might keep you eligible at your current school might, let's say you're a 2.2, but you've always stayed around that bubble and you've always maintained your progress towards degree eligibility. A 2.2 record might have some transferability issues with credits accepted at the new school, depending on where that student is seeking to transfer. So it's really just designed to help students kind of ask those questions, either of themselves, either of the school or the academic officials at the other schools that they're thinking about exploring transfer options. It's not there to dissuade a student from ultimately making a transfer decision, but going back to that original description, better informed transfer decisions, recognizing that most of these decisions from the goals data that's submitted are athletically motivated, but at the same time, the goal is that you can transfer successfully and still graduate. And so how do we help students, again, make informed decisions so that they're not caught off guard when they end up at the new school and they might not be able to pursue the degree that they thought they were going to. So those types of things is what that educational piece is about. This part about tampering is, again, it's reinforcing the existing rule that, coaches at other schools or the school that the student ultimately transfers needs to certify as a part of using this new exception that there was no impermissible recruiting conversations prior to the student going into the portal. That's obviously a big recruiting concern. You hear coaches bring that up at all points of transfer reform conversations. And so that's why that part ended up in the legislation. And they do understand that the current bylaw 13 rule prohibits that, but kind of, I guess, reaffirming it within the use of this transfer exception, the council thought was a good idea and perhaps would be maybe a stronger deterrent than just having the rule in bylaw 13 in and of itself. So that's why it shows up in this exception as well. And then the new part of the rule, which, to be perfectly honest, the staff was not sure whether this was going to be adopted by the council when they took the vote in April, but they did ultimately decide to add notification of transfer dates to use of the one-time transfer exception. This is just for this exception. So if for some reason you have a student that comes to you and as, let's say they were not on scholarship at their previous school, so they could actually come to you as under the non-scholarship transfer exception. That's a different exception than this uniform one-time transfer exception. So these notification dates or deadlines, whatever you want to think of them as, only apply to when a student is trying to come to you and fit under this exception, which is the broadest exception in Division I. And so all sports this year, and I'd say just focus on the July 1st deadline. As Josh mentioned, there's thousands of students already in the portal. So most students, I think, who will ultimately transfer will have no problem meeting this date. But in a normal year, if you're a fall or winter sport, you'd have a May 1st deadline. But given all the adjustments to schedules this year due to COVID, the council felt it was appropriate to give all sports until July 1st to, again, just provide written notice to their previous school that they're considering transferring. And that's, again, to kind of balance the students' flexibility and ability to transfer more easily with institutions just having a sense of who's going to stay and who's going to be a member of their program for the coming academic year. Really, a couple of good resources. I hope you've seen them. They've been pushed out on so many channels through the national office. But I would say, again, the FAQ, which is on the want to transfer page on nca.org. So it's a publicly accessible resource that was written for non-compliance practitioners. It was written for student athletes. It was written for their parents, coaches, to try to simplify what these rule changes are in a way that you don't have to have a compliance background or experience to understand what the rule changes are. So that's that resource. Those are the audiences intended for the FAQ, whereas the educational column from May 4th in LSDBI gets a little bit more technical. So those are, again, just two good resources that hopefully have crossed your desk over the past month or so. So I'm going to transition now to post-grad academic enrollment options and how this kind of fits into the transfer equation. So last spring, this was actually a rule change that went into effect or was adopted by the council. One of the few proposals acted on last year when the pandemic began was this proposal to modify what incoming, we now call them post-grad transfers. They used to be called grad transfers. But the reason we now call them post-grad transfers is because of this rule change, which essentially now allows a student who has earned their baccalaureate degree somewhere else and has at least one season of eligibility and time on their clock left, which we know is a larger cohort of students this year, given all the extensions, the seasons of competition due to COVID this year. When they come to your institution, they now have the flexibility to enroll in any full-time academic option that a post-baccalaureate student could do on your campus. Again, the old rule was really a grad transfer rule, meaning the options were different if you were a quote-unquote continuing postgraduate student versus somebody coming to you having earned their undergrad degree somewhere else. And that was a distinction that existed for a couple of decades. And I think it resulted in, I would say, some unintended consequences, a lot of pressure on graduate programs that certain student athletes either weren't prepared to do or weren't really interested in completing because maybe they had one semester or 1 year left of eligibility, and that was as long as they were going to stay on your campus. And so eventually, I'd say the Committee on Academics and the council kind of came to that recognition and said, students who want to do grad school and are ready to do grad school should do that, but maybe we should open open up the academic options for that other cohort of student athletes and allow the school and the student to figure out what's the best academic fit for that student while they're finishing their eligibility. And so that's why, again, you'll see the examples here that are available for, again, your continuing student who was an undergrad at your school, as well as the incoming student who had earned their baccalaureate degree somewhere else. They can pursue. It's completely dependent on what your school has and what offerings your school has. So if you have certificate programs that are again, full-time certificate programs that any student could pursue in a post-bac capacity at your school, an incoming post-grad transfer could now pursue that as well. We have questions, so I just did it a clarification point. They don't have to be degree seeking, as long as, again, that's if you can be a quote unquote like non-degree seeking post-bac in 12 hours, but you're still considered like a matriculated student at your school, a student athlete in this context coming to you as a transfer could pursue that. I know some schools don't allow that. Some schools say if you're coming to me as a post-bac, you need to be in a degree seeking program. And if that's your standard on your campus, obviously your student athletes would have a smaller array of academic options to enroll in. But if you have that broad diversity of options, your student athletes could pursue those. And then the last piece, because we still get the question is, well, then what's the 6-hour rule? How does that apply to a given student athlete? And it's tethered to what they're doing. So if your student is pursuing a specific program, a second baccalaureate degree, a certificate program, the 6 hours have to be a part of that program or a part of what that student is pursuing. If they're at the more liberal or the most liberal non-degree seeking 12 hours, really no requirements, it's really almost the student can enroll in 12 hours and explore whatever classes they want to explore. The 6 hours, they would just have to earn 6 of those 12 hours because, again, there would be nothing to tether the degree applicability to in this context. And so that's, again, an area where I'd say we still get some questions given that the change just went into effect for this most recent academic year. So that's actually all I wanted to cover with those two pieces to kick us off. And Josh, I think I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Emily. I actually have a question for you specifically as it relates to that one-time transfer legislation. Do you foresee it staying in place, or do you think the membership will want to return back to the quote unquote old way?
That's a great question, Josh. I cannot imagine that my personal opinion that the one-time transfer will be scaled back. I think you look at what the division has done generally, it's trying to, where we can, get rid of sport specificity unless we have data to support distinctions. And in this case, there was not academic data to say that just because you play men's ice hockey, for example, you're more academically at risk and therefore have to serve a year in residence than their men's soccer peer. And so I think, Josh, just that's kind of the direction you see a lot of the reforms going in Division I. So I wouldn't say that this is probably going to go away, but I think kind of it's, again, my opinion, I think it could take a couple of years for things to kind of adjust and for student athletes to kind of learn how to use this rule change in the best way for them. Because we know this year there's still the challenge going back to kind of this one-time piece. We know there's a lot of student athletes in the transfer portal who have already transferred. And so the waiver process is going to probably still be heavily used this year, even though the rule change was one of the reasons I think moved towards this rule change was to take some of the pressure off of the waiver process, which is much more subjective than the rule change. So that's why I'm saying I think it's going to take a couple of years for the students to learn the rule, as well as coaches. And then hopefully there's a little bit more stability overall. That was a lot of personal conjecture there.
Yeah, we'll definitely appreciate you. I see some questions filing in. Please continue to ask them. But I kind of wanted to shift to Sean, who's an expert in certification. Can you kind of talk about your transfer evaluation process and what are some best practices for new incoming transfers?
Absolutely. Thank you, Josh. Well, it's a team process. The biggest thing is, the sooner we can get a transcript, whether it be official or unofficial, for a prospective student athlete that's a coach is looking at or that is looking to come to UL Lafayette, we can start that evaluation process. And it involves the coach is getting the transcript, our student athlete academic services, and a rock star academic advisor, Tambria Bradford. We couldn't do this without her. Myself, and then the evaluators in the college. But once we get that process going, we can turn around pretty quickly. And the great thing about our process is my position actually works in the registrar's office. And we have the official record of all those courses that we're articulating. So when we tell the Student Athlete Academic Center, this is what this course evaluates to at our institution, it's the official record of the institution. And that we got the buy-in of the campus by telling the campus that we had, not only is this good for the student athletes and for recruiting and, making that the better informed decisions that Emily was talking about, but it's good for just recruiting overall, because now we have that course articulated in our catalog, and any student who wants to come to our institution can look at that and make a well-informed decision. And that was one of the biggest things about the buy-in that we got when we came to this process.
Kind of want to shift and connect with you, Steve, and I know you're kind of the guru as it comes to advising philosophy. I guess, how has the implementation of the new transfer legislation, changed your philosophy, if it has at all?
That's a great question. I would say overall, it really hasn't changed the philosophy that much. I think there's some nuances, but your overall philosophy is still going to be focused on making sure that you're putting your student athletes in the best position to be successful. A lot of my advising philosophy stems obviously around APR, and so I won't steal a lot of CJ's thunder. He's going to be talking about a little bit APR later on, but a goal of ours is obviously after the freshman year, the student athlete is we want to be a 2.6 or higher, obviously for APR purposes there, but also as you begin to progress in your career, if you're a 2.6 or better, it's going to be a couple bad semesters in a row before you really get into that issue of some GPA issues for eligibility and those different types of things. And so, the threat of a transfer, I guess, has always been there. And so even though they have to sit out a year, it didn't stop as many. Now that it's not there, we obviously are seeing more and more with the numbers that you threw out to start with. So I'd say overall, it hasn't changed it that much, but I think specific maybe to some things at the institutional level, it has expanded. I would say my thinking on it here at USF, we are limited to the number of withdrawals a student is allowed to take during their time. And so while we might have been a little more conservative on the front end, now with transfer portal, we might be a little more willing to take a few more W's early on to try to protect that GPA for some of those different types of things. And so again, just overall, it hasn't changed it too much. But again, I think at the institutional level, there's some things that you can look at to adjust to make sure that you're adapting what your institution requires to make sure that you are putting the student athletes in the best position, especially if they do choose to move on to that next stop.
So I guess speaking of next stops, and want to incorporate the student athlete development side with the great Liz Reyes. So transfers may not be new to college, but in coming to a new institution, they might be new to the process at that specific place. So what do you foresee are the biggest challenges in the adjustment process at a new institution for these transfer students?
Thanks, Josh. That's a great question. I think supporting student athletes and their acclimation to the new institution is going to be huge. We kind of have to put ourselves in their shoes and figuring out whether the transfer is coming from a large institution to a smaller institution or vice versa. What are the new expectations for them at that new institution? What kind of support is available, and are they aware of that kind of support, within academics, within the student athlete development office, on campus? We're obviously still in the middle of a pandemic. So how does that affect what they're going to be seeing, hearing every day, especially with learning? Is their academic expectations newer than before? Maybe at their old institution, they were transitioning to in-person. At the new institution, they're back to online, or vice versa. So being mindful of what they're going to be experiencing at the new place, I think is priority. And then also minding, what does their new social setting look like? Through COVID, a lot of us have experienced seeing student athletes from a distance interacting only with their teammates or only with their sport. So they're not making new relationships with different sports teams or with different campus groups like they would in the past, or kind of being more exploratory in the new community that they're moving to. So I think that the exploratory phase is also cut out, so they can't, be as social or be as out as they normally would pre-COVID. So I think those are some things that we should consider, and then also checking in on their mental health and seeing how they're doing. And building the relationships doesn't happen overnight. Strong ones and building trust doesn't happen overnight. So checking in with them constantly. If you could do it in person, that would be ideal. If you're working remotely, checking in with them, texting them, FaceTiming it, or whatever communication method you prefer. I think that those are small things that student athlete development professionals can do to help build that relationship, check in on their mental health, help them get acclimated to the new institution. I know for us at the University of Illinois, our team here, we have a team of 3 in the student athlete development office. Throughout the spring semester, we had kind of a student athlete development orientation / counseling sessions to check in and assess where all of our student athletes were, whether they were transfers, freshmen, graduate students in their junior senior, no matter where in the spectrum they fell. We did an all-encompassing one-on-one session. I think that would go a long way too with transfer student athletes, is sitting down with them one-on-one, having you introduce to them our office, our support, and knowing that there's always going to be someone available to help them in their transition, and to kind of start talking about what they want to do at that new institution with you. And I'll dive more into this later, but these one-on-one sessions have gone such a long way because we've been able to assess where they're at and kind of earmark what their career goals are and how they can possibly even expand their own resume and kind of bolster that to seeing well, we know you're not in the right, we know that you're not majoring your preferred major of choice. So what other options can we have to help connect you to your end career goals still? So I'll dive more into what those counseling sessions consisted of, but that's kind of where I think we can help student athletes as they're being onboarded to a new setting.
You kind of want to stay there. So what if I'm coming to Illinois and I want to be a nursing major, and now, based on PTD, I can't be a nursing major at the new institution?
Yeah, well, that's great. I've had plenty of examples, throughout my career where we have those student athletes that aren't able to transfer in or major in their desired major. Referring back to the counseling sessions that I was mentioning, there's plenty of opportunities still for them to gain experiences, whether it's shadowing, internships, part-time jobs in the small pockets that they can. Is it the summer? Is it their off season, where they can get some professional experiences and still be adding value to their resume? Also, all of us have an alumni letter winners association and a strong alumni base. So can they maybe be doing some informational interviews with those alumni that have been through the process? Some of them maybe have even transitioned too. So they can also help with, with helping them provide strong career service support. Also connecting them to campus and campus resources. Is there a pre-nursing office, career counseling office? Also, as we all know, there's plenty of registered student organizations, RSOs. Is there a nursing club that they can join in so they could still be with peers, even outside of sport, but be in conversations and be in clubs or activities when they can in those small pockets, still related to nursing so that they're not, quote, falling behind and still like on the cutting edge of news and things that are affecting nursing. Going back to connecting with the career services person in the nursing area, they may be able to also provide additional support or additional resources. So I think that's really important. And when we're talking about assessing where they're at coming in, you know, maybe we know that they're not going to have an equivalent resume to someone who's on campus and had 5 internships, is doing research, and currently a teacher's assistant, right? Those resumes are going to look very different. But in assessing your student athlete's resume, maybe you can get them involved in leadership. You know, there's so many different pillar areas within student athlete development that they can get involved in. Is it in outreach? Is it in leadership? Is it in your diversity and inclusion efforts? What are those areas? And do the student athlete know what those areas are that are available for them, and helping them kind of bolster their resume in those areas, and of course tailoring it in this case to nursing.
That makes a ton of sense. I want to shift to you, Ashley, because we heard about the student athlete development side, but what about, I guess, from the academic side? So how do you evaluate the level of support that a transfer needs? Somebody that's coming in that's new, you know, when they get to your campus, and maybe even talk about if they're resistant to what you're able to provide them from an academic standpoint.
Sure. So every new student athlete, regardless if they're incoming or a transfer student, they'll complete an educational profile and a Kane assessment that helps us partly determine what kind of support that they're going to receive. So the educational profile, it includes basic demographic information, but it also has questions that's geared toward gaining a better understanding of any outside factors that may also be impacting their academic success. So some of those questions range from just like their history of learning differences in their family, whether or not English is their first language, if they're a first generation student, if they have any dependents, and then other mental health related questions, just to get an idea of, do you need services initially coming to TCU? And then with that, we also pair it with the Kane Assessment, which is a formal questionnaire that basically measures the strengths and weaknesses of a student in regards to their reading and writing skills, math, anxiety, time management, and organization. And we'll use that piece to identify any students that may need a formal educational evaluation as a way to kind of keep the cost down on giving everybody an educational evaluation that may not necessarily need it. So that's our way of identifying those students, recommending further testing if the indicators are there for that. And then also looking at the academic history of that transfer student at their former institution, the success rates of our student athletes currently in some of the classes that they are enrolled in, are some other factors that we look at when we determine what type of academic support that they're going to need also. We do treat our incoming and transfer students alike. You kind of touched base on this a little bit. They're transitioning into a new learning environment, and they're going to be dealing with a different type of athletic commitment as well, depending on what they were used to at their previous institution. And so from that standpoint, from an incoming first year student to a transfer student, we classify them into a tier designed for their level of academic support being a tier 1. So because they're transitioning to a new environment, we want to make sure that they have academic support up front. Now, what that looks like, they're going to at least have at minimum a trained academic coach. That way they can at least get an idea of, you know, how that first year is going to affect them, along with tutoring, depending on what classes that they're enrolled in. But we're going to give the students an opportunity at least to earn their way out of some of the services is what we'll do. So if you have proven, you know, that you can maintain a certain grade within some of your classes, then we can reduce the amount of support that we give you for, say, the tutoring. But typically it's really just the tutoring that ends up getting reduced. And a lot of students really benefit from the support of the academic coach and the accountability that they get there from, even if it's just once a week, having that person to just kind of run things through and make sure that they're staying on task.
Another quick follow-up for you. Someone asked about the Kane Assessment. Can you kind of dive more into that? Like, who's responsible for it? Like, how do you all administer the test for those incoming students?
So the Kane Assessment is actually something that is you purchase. The full name, it's the Kane Learning Difficulties Assessment. It can be purchased in bulk for about $4 a student, and that pretty much gives you the administration of the test itself, and then they will also populate the score report for you. So everything is done on their end, and will basically just give you all of the different indicators that would also, it also provides like an assessment to let you know that this person might need testing in these areas. I can provide the link to the Kane Assessment as well if someone is interested in that.
Definitely appreciate that. Emily, I kind of wanted to kick it back to you. We have Ashley's expertise about how to deal with struggling students, but from a NCAA perspective, what are some of the PTD waivers that may be available to those high achieving students whose first choice of major is very restrictive and they might not meet, PTD? So kind of going back to that nursing example or something like that.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Yeah, we do have a precedent in the PTD waiver space to look at waivers for that example, Josh. So somebody coming into your school who simply by nature of not having begun either nursing or engineering, some of those more structured programs at your school, simply isn't able to meet, let's say 40%, for example, coming in the door. They really want to pursue that degree. If you have a student in that position who could be, the easiest way is for you to show in the waiver request that that student could be eligible in a more open degree program at your school, be that interdisciplinary studies, liberal studies, really any other program that doesn't have all that structured parameter around its curriculum. Because in being able to show that through the waiver request, you could make the argument that it's not the student's academic record that is causing their deficiency in the degree that they actually want to pursue. And so, again, I share that because if that's the student you're looking at who you feel like, yeah, they're a little bit behind percentage of degree because it's a really restrictive degree program, but he or she can catch up over the next few years to actually still earn that degree by the conclusion of their 5 years of eligibility and the 5-year APR metric. Those are what I would consider like pretty strong waiver requests. So yeah, Josh, I just wanted to share that is something that is well within the scope of approvable waivers, and just so that schools don't feel discouraged for asking for that waiver for a student in that situation.
Thank you. If any of the participants have any questions, don't hesitate to throw those in the chat or the Q&A. But I wanted to connect with you, CJ. I know you're in that basketball world specifically, but how has the new transfer legislation and or, I guess that post-bac space impacted decisions related to APR?
No, that's definitely a good question. So for me, I don't think it's impacted me a lot in my day-to-day, but I'm more so focused now on making sure, again, for the transfers that, whatever their end goal is, to make sure that, we're getting to that. So, for an example, they're just trying to play that one season, the WNBA draft is in April. So it's like, hey, they may not be there, in Maryland, we go to June sometimes. So it's like, hey, what is their outcomes? What are they looking for? So are they actually trying to complete their master's program? Are they just trying to, get through? So again, just making sure you're aligning whatever they want their goals to be to match up with the school. I think that's most important. especially, as we build these or continue to build relationships with the grad programs. I think it's very important not to burn any bridges. But as far as, when you're looking at the APR side of things, with the post-bac, with losing the automatic retention point, that 0 for 1 is a little bit different. So it's always about making sure that, how can they get that E point? At the end of the day, obviously, we're in this for the students, but, it's a good reminder to let, the students and the coaches know, like, hey, your APR will be affected for, your grad students who don't get that E point. And the same thing with the transfers. I know sometimes you have transfer who they're disgruntled and they want to, not have anything to do with the program. But, as Emily said, you still have to leave that institution eligible. So it's just having those conversations, with the coaches and the student to make sure, we're all on the same page about, hey, you're still a student first. No matter what, you believe, you're still a student first. So you have to take care of all of that. And again, just making sure their goals match up with whatever their end goal is.
That's solid, man. Liz, I kind of wanted to kick it back to you. Talk about the, student athlete development from a programming standpoint. So how do you get your students caught up with their student athlete development framework, the way it's set up at your institution? So if I'm a transfer and I'm coming as a junior, how do you catch me up on the programming that your institution had as a sophomore or a freshman?
Yeah, I think having an initial student athlete development orientation or counseling meeting, as I referenced earlier, is going to be critical in that, just so that we can assess where you're at. And kind of looking, on the career side, like, do you have a resume? Have you had any internships? Have you applied to graduate school? Depending on what your career goals are, that's going to let me know what quote path you want to follow. And then also let me know what kind of programming is going to be most relevant to you. I know different institutions have different programming standards, if you will. Some programming is mandatory, some is voluntary, and some falls in the middle. So you just have to identify, what programming are you offering and what's going to fit best with that incoming student athlete. Also, like I mentioned earlier, checking in on morale and kind of seeing how they're feeling. Are they coming in as someone who's in a major that they didn't want to be in, and checking in on how they're feeling and letting them know that they're not behind. They can always reach their career goals no matter what they majored in, and helping them build those connections. If they're wanting to apply to graduate school, but they're not in the right major not in the major they prefer to be in, can you help them with their application materials? Do they know what the application process even is? Or if they're trying to jump into the workforce right after, are they prepared with their career materials? Do they know how to interview well? Can you help facilitate mock interviews? I know here at the University of Illinois, we pitched like a mock interview march, saying anyone who's interested in getting an internship this summer or wants to just be ready for the next step after your graduation, sign up for a mock interview. We did a 30-minute interview with our staff, provided immediate feedback afterwards. And it was great just to get them kind of in that quote hot seat and get them trying to speak on, those transferable skills and how they can be ready for whatever is next. So a couple of things there, just checking on the morale, helping them, just like CJ mentioned, helping them still connect the dots to the end goal and what they're trying to do, and identifying what programming is most relevant to them so that they're quote caught up, and following, of course, your standards and the way you set things up on what's voluntary, what's mandatory. But that initial conversation is going to be huge just to kind of assess their levels and what they're trying to get to.
Thank you. Do any of the other panelists just kind of want to chime in on anything that you didn't get to talk about that you want to share with our participants today? During the meantime, if anybody has any more questions, they're kind of slowing down now, please throw them in the chat now.
I'll jump in here with something that I didn't mention, but definitely came to mind is, as student athlete development professionals, a big conversation is how you're tracking impact and measuring, your office success and the level of support you're providing. if you could provide, metrics for that, contact, for all the different pillar areas. If you're trying to assess leadership, if you're trying to assess career, if you're trying to assess all these different areas, definitely feel free to communicate with your campus partners, because they're also in the same boat as you. And so you want to kind of align with the same measurements that campus is having. And as you're assessing and tracking that, you could package that into a report and also give it to your coaches for recruiting purposes later down the road. So we definitely want to walk the talk. And if we said you could come here, and if we said we could connect you to the ideal career path, that we said, well, what were the steps that we did before that? And how did we track that? And we can package that and give that to coaches to help them on their trails, on their recruiting trails.
I want to piggyback off what Liz said. Communication is huge. And, I have to give a shout out to the transfer team in the registrar's office. They actually built out the business process that I feel like I fell into when it came to doing transfer evaluations, and they did a rock star job. But being able to communicate everything and let people realize that this is a team process and we do want the students to succeed. And part of that is giving them informed information on what their previous coursework looks like coming into our institution is huge. Because the last thing you want is having say a 2-4 transfer coming in, and we thought they had 50 hours, and all of a sudden we find out that they're here, they're locked in, and all they have is 47. That would just be horrible. So increase the communication, and the more accurate information you can give, the better the situation will be.
I was going to follow up with what CJ spoke about in regards to APR. I know that obviously APR is on a 2-year moratorium right now. It's going through an evaluation process. Nobody's really 100% sure what's going to come of it. But I think our coaches have heard that and kind of put it on the back shelf and have moved on and think that it's just going to disappear. But I would just challenge everybody to operate as if it's coming back, or if it's going to come back in some way, shape, form, or fashion. And these 2 years we're on a moratorium. We're still recording and reporting that data. It won't be released publicly, but it could still possibly be in your 4-year cohort at that point. And so while there could be some adjustments to it and some different things that, keep in mind that APR still really could be there in one way, shape, form, or fashion. And so just to echo what CJ said, it's vital that we keep in mind these decisions and how they do affect APR, and continue to remind, our coaches and our administration of the importance of APR.
No, that's solid. I honestly feel like coaches don't care about APR anymore for whatever reason. So that's good information. Continue to educate your coaches and your administrations. I know a lot of institutions, honestly, like a UAB, we kind of need those academic units. So yeah, we need the money from high APR scores. So good deal. Anything else from our panelists?
I think for me, sorry. I'll be quick. So I just want to say, make sure we're supporting our transfer students, no matter whether they're incoming or outcoming. I know this, they have a lot of people in their area. They have a lot of things going on, social media, whatnot. So, just got to be there for them. I know they hear a lot, but I've with my transfers that I had, that's the one thing that I've been able to be is just, kind of be there as, a soundboard, or, hey, this is my take on, what your situation looks like. And, hey, even though you're transferring out, I still want you to make sure you finish strong. And I still want you to make sure you go to your new institution and do all the things that, you said that you wanted to do. Because we know most of the time, more often than not, that decision to transfer is strictly an athletic decision. So, but just remind them again, hey, you still want to get your degree. But yeah, like I said, just want to make sure we all have that in mind. Again, that they're still students, and we want to be holistic about, how we go about, advising them.
Oh, that's solid. Actually, did you have something, Ashley?
Yeah, I just wanted to stress the importance of data. Whenever you can collect it, do. Not only just from an APR standpoint, but just to understand how your students are doing throughout their time, even from transfers or your incoming students. But that's your way to really get an idea of, where you might need to shift your focus in order to help those students be more successful now that you're going to have the trend of more transfer students coming to your potential institutions.
Well, good deal. I'm going to turn it back over to Christine Ball, who will close us out, but I definitely want to thank all of our wonderful panelists. If you have any questions for anybody, don't hesitate to reach out, as we are here to help. And then I finally want to give a special shout out to Katie Graham at NC State, who's Assistant Dean and Director of Academic Support. Out there, she has done a tremendous job of being the chair the last couple of years for the N4A Legislative Service Committee. So we truly value your leadership, and pretty sure CJ is ready to take this thing over, man.
Absolutely. Awesome presentation, you guys. So thank you all for your thoughtful questions and participation. And panelists, I appreciate your final comments. Again, y'all gave tremendous information. So on behalf of N4A and its leadership, thank you for taking the time to share this information and addressing our organization. We appreciate all of the hard work you do supporting our student athletes. That concludes today's session. So thank you, N4A family, for joining us this afternoon. Please have a wonderful day and please remain safe. Thank you guys again.